Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of my Athletic Compendium. Today we're going to talk about aerobic fitness. Last week we spoke about anaerobic fitness, its importance, where it fits in sport. So Max, why is aerobic fitness important? What is aerobic fitness? How does it differ?
So aerobic fitness is different to anaerobic because you are doing an intensity to which you can sustain for a long period of time because you're getting in oxygen quickly enough to be circulated around the body, go to the right muscles, go to the right areas. So therefore you can sustain that sort of intensity for a long period of time.
Right.
Why
is that important?
Why is it important? Because it just allows us to, if you play sport, to be able to last the whole game without, getting fatigued and being unable to perform. So yeah, it's important to be able to last, if you're playing football or rugby, to be able to last the whole game and be effective on the pitch without blowing out your hoop the whole time. And it also helps with recovery from anaerobic bouts as well. So the benefits that you get from aerobic training and conditioning can also help. So if you're doing like repeated sprints, or if you're playing a game of rugby or football, you do several repeated sprints in a row, and then you've got that capacity to reoxygenate, to get oxygen around your blood, around your body. To reoxygenate your muscles and just to make sure that you're recovering from those intense bouts, as well as just being able to generally get around.
So it helps with clearance of lactate, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing in the anaerobic side, aren't you? You're generating lactic acid.
Yeah.
So the aerobic side of things helps you get better at eliminating those waste products.
Yeah.
And oxygenating your muscles.
Yeah.
Cool. How do you train for it?
So it's a steady state. So you can do this in whether that's just in several different ways. You can do it obviously just by going on a long distance run at an intensity that you can sustain. This is quite dependent on how fit you are. So one person might be able to train at a much higher intensity than another, but it's staying sustainable than another person. So we might go on a 5 kilometre run and you might be able to run it much quicker than myself.
Doubtful.
Doubtful. Well, I can't run at the minute because of my back, but so that it varies from person to person, but how you do that is you can go on a run, you can do it on a bike, you can do it on a rower, you can do it swimming, you can do it in many different ways. But it's just doing it for a longer sustained period of time. You can do aerobic bouts, so as long as it fits within that sort of intensity below the lactic threshold.
Right. So it's about picking a level that you can maintain for a long period of time. And obviously if you're working too hard, you're going to fatigue way quicker.
Yeah. And this is something that you'll naturally be able to judge anyway. So say you go on a 5 kilometre run or a 10 kilometre run, and you feel like you're running at a decent pace, and you're thinking, shit, I'm not going to be able to carry on doing this sort of pace, and you naturally slow down. It's something that everyone's able to do.
Yeah. And you get to a pace where you feel like you could maintain that for maybe half a marathon, sort of 20 kilometres.
Yeah, and so. It's just something that you can manage yourself, but in terms of the actual, because it's there's a threshold, but how you what's the word, the training intensity that you should be training at for say rugby or football, or whether that's you're a marathon runner, is going to be different, because although it's a sustainable pace, you're going to be if you're training to be your aerobic capacity for a game of rugby is going to be a different sort of pace to running a marathon, because marathon runners are going to be working at a lower intensity, but for fucking hours.
Yeah, whereas rugby is 80 minutes.
It's 80 minutes. There's no point in you going at such a low intensity that you can do it for hours, because that's not specific to a game of rugby.
Right. So how do you train for that? Let's pick rugby, because it's slightly shorter than football. but it's still 80 minutes and you get a little break in between.
Yeah.
What sort of intensity are you working for? How often are you training for aerobic fitness? What sort of part of your, let's say, gym block are you fitting that in with?
So aerobic fitness is kind of not the priority when it comes to team sports, because most team sports are repeated efforts of sprints.
Yeah.
With some sort of jogging in between.
That makes sense, yeah.
So in terms of the difference, like how you train your aerobic training for rugby in comparison to football isn't going to be too dissimilar, because realistically 10 minutes difference in a game is not massive.
Yeah.
Rugby specifically, rugby and football specifically, in terms of like how you'd fit that into your like gym routine, is if you're training very consistently throughout the season, you'd probably get that in mainly in the off season. You want to kind of maintain that aerobic capacity for forever, really. Not just for health benefits, but also you want to have that capacity going into pre-season, and then in pre-season that's when you start to ramp up the intensity
within the sessions itself.
Yeah, obviously if a person or if an athlete is particularly like struggling in that area, then obviously yes, that's something that you would prioritize, because if you're not able to get around the park for the duration of the game, then you're not going to be effective, and someone else will get selected over you. But it's definitely something that you can work on in pre-season and during the season. Yeah. But it's just you should already have that, especially if you're playing every week.
Yeah.
You should have that aerobic and anaerobic capacity, because you're just playing all the time.
So someone, let's say, getting back from an injury, has been out of the game for sort of 6 months, they want to get back to match fitness.
Yeah.
Where would you start them? Obviously, let's say they're continuing with their gym work. What block would you fit that aerobic fitness in with, and how often would you have them doing aerobic fitness?
Yeah, so you would say they come back from injury, or they're going starting their pre-season or whatever, they're starting their sort of journey, I suppose. They would train aerobic first rather than anaerobic, because for a number of different reasons. The first reason being, if they've just come back from an injury, they want low impact, they want something that's not going to be too taxing on their body, to build up that sort of low intensity sort of durability,
get that volume
up. Yeah, exactly. So that can be done with things like one of our lads has just come back from injury now, is doing like longer distance watt bikes. So he's doing giving him 10k, 7k, 5k, 3k on a bike with 2 minutes rest in between. So it's quite like.
And these are on different days?
This is all in one session.
All in one session.
Yeah, so it's quite, you'll pretty much spend the hour on the bike, more or less. Or not the hour, maybe 45 minutes or so. And then I'll give him target times, and he'll just try and hit those target times. But it's good doing it that way. Kind of gives me an idea of what that athlete's capable of doing from the longer slog distances, like 10k to down to 3. But the reason why I do it on a watt bike potentially is, well, this athlete has come back from a lower body injury.
Yeah.
So it's non-impact, but it's also getting some volume through their legs, which they've not had in a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it allows us to see where he's at in terms of his long distance and his 3k, which is going to be like a few minutes of work. So it needs to be, it's going to be quite a big effort for that last one.
A lot higher intensity on those.
Yeah, it's still going to be aerobic, because you're still doing it over several minutes. But towards the end you are going to be fucking going for it, aren't you, to get a decent time. So at that point it's going to go from kind of maybe an aerobic kind of intensity, and then you build it up into a point where you
so they're almost going from aerobic into a bit of anaerobic work within the same session.
Yeah, that's like the nature of what we were doing in particular. If you can do things like tempo runs, where so you'll be hitting a specific like intensity, so you're going to keep within that aerobic bracket. But we were kind of testing what that player can do as an individual in terms of what times he's hitting. So there is going to be an element of like the first bit will be a little bit more
light.
Like you manage it yourself really, with split times and stuff. And it's good to again have that target that they can hit for that distance, so that they know roughly what pace to be doing. But yeah, towards the end, they will obviously start to ramp up the intensity and to get a decent time.
So what about running? What sort of distances for aerobic fitness is beneficial for athletes that are playing rugby, that are playing football?
Yeah.
Is it worth them training marathon sort of distances? What's a good sort of distance to be aiming for?
So with this, is again team sport kind of thing. Again, I sort of specialise, I suppose, in rugby. You look at what distance you'd cover in a game, and then you try and replicate that.
Right.
Or maybe give a bit of a surplus. So you'd train to that to that distance, and go from there. I'm not saying that you should be running for 80 minutes solid, but that for that duration of time, but that distance would be quite a good starting point.
Right.
What's roughly, I can't remember off the top of my head like specific distances, but I think it's probably somewhere around 4 to 5k depending on what position you're in.
Right.
But again, it's slightly different because you're not, that 4 or 5k during a rugby game, you're not doing it just jogging,
low intensity.
So
you're jogging, then you're sprinting, then
but I think in terms of if you're starting, coming back from injury or starting pre-season or whatever, you'll be starting at that that kind of distance. Doing 4 or 5k runs heading into pre-season is not a bad idea. Just to get that that endurance, I suppose, so it's not going to be such a shock to the system come pre-season. And it will also have a bit of a correlation and have similar physiological adaptations to to also help your anaerobic performance, which I might have mentioned in the last episode. So
go back to that lactic acid clearance and the oxygenation of your muscles, because you've got a better blood supply. But in terms of, because low intensity voluminous work like aerobic training, where players are going to be sort of gymming to either work on speed, strength, power. What sort of block would you put aerobic fitness in? Because obviously, like you said, during season, most people have got that fitness. They've built that up anyway. You're match fit. Everyone will sort of know that expression, where you're not really doing anything additional, but you're fine to play 80 minutes. What sort of block would you have someone in doing their aerobic?
So
building them into that sort of match fitness.
You can do both, like or like any block that you're in. If you're looking to be, you can be a really powerful, strong athlete, and you want to, keep going with that, and you that's where your performance is best. However, if you're unable to last the 80 minutes, then you can do both. It's not optimal by any means, but you can do both. In an ideal world, because you're essentially aerobic and anaerobic training is quite high in volume, isn't it? So, linking that with high volume training, such as hypertrophy training, right? Because that's higher volume, they kind of link hand in hand.
Okay.
So again, in an ideal world, it never really works out that way, but you'd be in your hypertrophy block and you would do, like, for example, we've just come from the off season. And I've given the boys a hypertrophy program, so they're going into pre-season.
Having done a lot of volume,
having done decent volume, so they're less likely to get injured. They're going to be somewhat fit, and they've linked that hypertrophy in their aerobic anaerobic capacity in that off season. So then we can go into pre-season kind of already with a bit of a head start. But yeah, like I said, you can get to a point where you can do your your power and your strength training, but again, I just think it's not going to be massively optimal. I try and split it up and try and have them on separate days, for example, or but you just got to manage those intensities and those volumes so that the players are not going to get injured, essentially, because the last thing you want is for them to be fatigued from a really long slogging like watt bike session or run or whatever, and then go in to do some really powerful triple extensions or something, which makes me think go on to the, if you're going to do a gym session and a fitness session, which to do first. Me personally, I would always recommend doing your gym session first and then go to do your, have a bit of a break, have a refeed, have a bit of, a rehydrate and stuff like that.
Get your nutrition on board, make sure you're recovering effectively.
Which you know more than me, but that this is something that we would do is, get them to do their weight session, whether that's power, strength, hypertrophy, whatever. Have a refeed, have a, hydration, and then go into your fitness session, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it's the same with your rugby sessions as well. We'd always try and get the skills session done, then go into weights, and then go into the rugby session in the evening, because you don't want to have that risk of injury. Because if you're going to fatigue yourself by doing a training session, like a rugby session, like a team session, or doing a conditioning session, and then lift some heavy weights, it's obviously going to be put this potential
because you're
there,
fatigued, you're more likely to injure yourself. So those aerobic fitness sessions. Let's say someone's come back from injury, they're in a hypertrophy block because they're on their way back to, they're in pre-season. You've got them doing some aerobic work, they're in a hypertrophy block. Let's say they're training 4 times a week on a hypertrophy block. How many aerobic sessions would you have them doing in a week? How would you progress? Would you do them sort of like a 5k one week, 10k another week? How would you progress?
Again, so with, if I wouldn't necessarily, if they're running 5k in the first few weeks, I wouldn't increase the distance, because that's not specific to the game of rugby. Because obviously, like I said, in a game, you're going to cover about 4 or 5k depending on what position you are.
Yeah.
So in terms of progression or progressive overload from an aerobic running capacity, I wouldn't necessarily increase the distance, but I'd try and get them to push for a better time, or better time is probably the easiest way of doing it. But then you can change the session up slightly, so you can make it a little bit more. If they are progressing and getting in the right direction, they're hitting good times for this, then you can start to focus more on that anaerobic capacity. Yeah. Because that really is the priority. That is the kind of more specific. Kind of fitness. So.
Because once they get to a certain aerobic fitness, they don't necessarily need to be fitter. Yeah. But you need to be better at clearing that lactic acid, so you can
repeatability or being speed endurance. So being able to sprint for a long period of time in sevens is like particularly like that.
So would like one run, one watt bike session a week?
You did ask that.
Suffice?
I'd try and do a little bit more. It really depends. This is why it's quite like strength and conditioning can get quite not complicated, but you need to be thoughtful with it, because just running once a week and you're not doing any rugby training sessions or not playing is not enough. Whereas if you're doing 1 running session a week, but you're also doing 2 rugby sessions, 2 skills sessions, and a load of gym, then all of a sudden that is quite a decent amount. If you're in pre-season, most people listening are probably semi-professional, so they'll be training on a Tuesday, Thursday, won't be playing games just yet. If the rugby sessions are pretty intense, which they normally are in pre-season, then maybe getting another 1 or 2 runs in,
so a weekend run.
Yeah, weekend run, but just making sure that you've got, sensible recovery days. I think, like me, at the minute, I'm kind of looking into, I'm kind of spending a bit of time thinking about, where to put those recovery days, because I like to have, me personally, this isn't like any scientific thing or anything, but I'll have like what I call a regen day. Yeah. So like a regeneration day. So that's like where you're doing active recovery, you're over, not carb loading, but you're eating sufficiently, you're drinking loads, you're doing active recovery, you're stretching, you're foam rolling, like a regeneration day. And then I'll have rest days, which is just where I do my own thing, do nothing, just enjoy my day and do whatever I want. I'm kind of playing around with them and working what works best for my clients as well, because some of them are just on it and they love to have, get in the gym even if they're not training properly, to which, I'd make them have a couple of regen days, and I'm thinking, okay, well, does that mean, if they're really proactive with their recovery, can I give them an extra running session or gym session? So bit of a tangent that, but again, you just got to be sensible and listen to your body. If you're
if you're absolutely knackered and you feel like you need a rest, chances are you probably need a rest.
Yeah, if 2 weeks has gone by and you've done 2 running sessions and 2 rugby sessions, and you're starting to think, fuck, I'm actually feeling a bit, just have a week of just, okay, I'll just do 1 running session, or just do the rugby sessions. And then you can go again, and then you can kind of work out what works best for you, because it is very, very individualistic. Is that even a word? I don't know. But then you might find towards the end of pre-season you can up it a little bit and do it more frequently, which is another way of progressive overloading. You're still hitting the same distances, but you're doing it more frequently throughout the week.
Well, that sort of leads on to our next topic, which we're going to talk about next week, but the supercompensation theory. Whereas if you're doing too much and you're constantly drilling yourself into the ground, you're never going to get that benefit, are you, of the actual work itself, because you're not giving yourself that recovery. But
exactly. I think that pretty much wraps it up in terms of that sort of baseline, basic sort of stuff in aerobic. We can go really in depth with it and go sciencey, but for now,
well, there will be some more episodes coming up where we do go further in depth over the topics we've already discussed, but we obviously want our first load of topics to be that general basis, that general foundations, so you guys as listeners can really understand the basics before we start diving into the deeper nitty-gritty stuff about it. So hope you've enjoyed the episode. We're going to be back next week and we're going to discuss that supercompensation theory.
You might find that we're wearing the same clothes if you're watching on YouTube.
Point that out, why don't you? Right, cheers guys, thanks for listening.
Ta-ta.
Ta-ta. Arrivederci.